Welcome to the Onyx Report, a program that critically analyzes the experiences, histories, and perceptions of black males in American society across age, class, region, sexuality, and profession. I'm your host, DrTHasanJ, Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Fresno State, Black Male Studies Scholar, and Black Male Advocate. In the program, we examine current events and major issues using an empirically driven Black Masculinist theoretical lens, thus including such concepts as the black male dual economy, anti-black misandry, phallicism, the subordinate male target hypothesis, and the black dynarchy. Our goal is to remind people, including black men themselves, of black men's humanity. Join us every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific, either on YouTube or innerlightradio.com. All right, people. Welcome back to the Onyx Report. It's going to be a pretty busy night tonight. We're going to start out with here on Inner Light and transition onto YouTube with two distinct shows. So tonight we're starting with an interview with a favorite brother of mine who we're referring to as BGS, because that is what he is. Black Gnostic Speaks. I'm going to call him Black Gnostic Supreme, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But we're going to be talking about the coronavirus, and we're going to be asking the question, is it real or is it a hoax? That will be from roughly 5 to 6 o'clock, depending on Brother Jamal's perception of things. But then from there, after 6, on YouTube, on a live stream, we'll be talking about the death of a security guard at the hands of a family over the issue of wearing a mask. And I'll be getting into that and dealing with some of the dynamics of that, and then having a discussion with a good colleague of mine there, Kendra D, also known as Crimson Cure, as we talk about the gender implications and family structure and gender role implications and a variety of other things that pertain to that particular killing. And then following that, in the same stream, we'll open it up and actually have a live stream discussion on that. So it's going to be a pretty busy night. So I hope you stick with us from Inner Light to YouTube. You can catch that also on Facebook. If you go to my Facebook page, you'll be able to see the stream as well when we're done here. And I will likely post this discussion with BGS. It'll probably be either later tonight or tomorrow, depending on whether or not I pass out. Anyway. Normally you guys know I start with current events, but because of the importance of what we're all grappling with right now, I'm not going to do a lot of that tonight. We'll probably delve into a variety of current events as we go, but I wanted to just jump right in. So first of all, man, thank you for coming in, especially on such short notice, Brother BGS. I appreciate you being willing to do that. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Doing good, man. I'm in this house with my son, so we're having a lot of the time building.
So mini monk mode, huh?
Oh yeah, it's definitely that. I don't know if anybody saw the video of the father and son at home, and the son was playing video games, and the father fell down the stairs and had to get up and yell at his son about helping him out with some stuff. We're kind of close to that. My Xbox has my son's attention more than anything else. But anyway, despite all of that, let's jump right in, man. There's been a lot of discussion, as understandable, about the veracity of this, whether or not there actually is, a pandemic. There have been a lot of discussions around, Dr. Buttar, Donald Trump, of course, China. Is all of this fabricated? Is it real? And in an era where we have such access to information, one of the things that we often lack is context, is clarity, is narrative, and that seems to be the currency of the day. Whereas when I was coming up, if you wanted information, hopefully you owned a thesaurus and an encyclopedia collection. But now we're in an era where at the tap of your fingers on your phone, you can access all kinds of information, but then the question becomes, what's accurate, what isn't, how do we measure? So I wanted to start with just, can you tell us from your assessment, what exactly is this coronavirus? And
okay. Okay, from me tracking this, 'cause I first started tracking this in late January when it was first announced that it was a real thing, and I really got serious with it with the lockdown, that everybody saw, the armed lockdown of the Wuhan province. They locked down over 10 million people and didn't allow them in or out, and that really got my attention in mid-February. And so I reached out to a couple of specialists that I know. One, a genetic scientist in Los Angeles, and also a pharmaceutical scientist in Philadelphia. And I asked them, did they see this, and is this a real thing? And they said this is definitely a real thing. And at the time, this is way back in early February, they said this is probably coming out of a lab. And they said this, months ago. So I've been tracking it ever since, and it is very real. And there's actually a video on YouTube talking about the documentary on the what they call the COVID-19 or the Wuhan virus, right? Done by an alternative press site called Epoch Times, which I don't particularly trust them, but the thing is, I actually looked at the video and they showed the documents going all the way back to 2006. In other words, there's such a program called gain of function for viruses, right? In other words, enhancing the virus to do certain things, whether it's cure cancer, cure genetic diseases, defeat other viruses. In other words, it's a gain of function where you actually take existing organisms and enhance them to do all sorts of things. Okay. And this particular virus, I'm trying to remember the lady's name. They call her the Bat Woman, because she specializes in bats and coronaviruses. Okay. And she's been doing this since 2006. In fact, she's done all kinds of peer-reviewed papers, and I think one was actually nationally known. She actually did it back in 2017, and another one in 2013, which the Epoch Times actually shows. It actually shows in this long documentary where they showed Chinese sources and whatnot. And then in 2017, in 2014, in fact, I was just looking at it. 2014, President Obama didn't like the way it was going, so he cut off funding for gain of function in studying viruses. Okay, 2014, I think it says October 2014. In December of 2017, Donald Trump actually re-energizes the program in 2017 under Dr. Fauci. Okay. So it's no wonder that you might see these kind of things. In fact, that was one thing that Obama was saying, that we need to have a moratorium on this kind of stuff, because we don't know, with all these CRISPRs out here and playing with these, or playing God with these organisms, what could actually come out. And this could be, in my estimation, one of the results. But as far as this particular virus, 2017, they actually knew that this virus existed, but only in animals, especially only in bats, which was a reservoir for it. And in 2017, the COVID SARS-2 existed, but they hadn't crossed over into the human population until 2019. So the thing is, the virus does exist. It does what it says it does. They've been playing with this virus since 2006. Especially intensely since 2013, with remember the reports about the National Institutes of Health giving $3.7 million to the Wuhan virology lab for this kind of work. That's what it was for, even though they deny it now. But the thing is, it's on record that they did. Okay. So
well, then let's cut to the heart of one of the more central questions that I've been seeing people debating back and forth online about. Are there significant numbers of deaths? Are there deaths at all to this virus, or is it all fabricated? Is it a hoax? Are they transferring the numbers of deaths from heart disease and cancer arbitrarily? We hear, part of the discussion going on is that doctors are being incentivized and pressured to label everything as a COVID death, and so you have some people that are saying there's overlap, then you have others that are saying there are no COVID deaths, that this is all really just a misdocumenting of death certificates to blow this out of proportion. What's real in regard to these deaths?
Okay, that was a question, and for whatever reason, the New York Times took exception to it. And so they actually went back over the data, and they actually tracked the average deaths per year. They went over a 20 year time period, and they did it for, I think it was like 10 states.
Okay.
And so they actually took the average number of deaths per year of all deaths. I'm not talking about just accidents, cancer, whatever, just all deaths, total deaths. And they compared it to the last 3 months of the outbreak. And what they found out was, especially in New York City, basically the average death rate per week in New York City over the last 20 years was like between 800 and 1,000, right? Okay. In April, they had 7,000 deaths per week. In other words, over 6 times the amount of expected deaths. Not 6%, not 10%, but 600% over the expected deaths. You have this big spike, and so people took exception to that. So they went to look at other states. They looked at like 10 more states. I think it was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Michigan, and a few others. And the average was between 200% and 300% more deaths in the last 3 months than the normal rate during this time period over the last 20 years. And then there was one later, which is the finance. Was it the I think it was the Economist, in Great Britain. Okay, very prestigious 100-year-old publication in Great Britain, and they did the same thing, but they did it for Europe and in large cities around the world, like Jakarta in Indonesia, like Quito, Ecuador, other places, right? And the average was at least 200-300% higher deaths in those regions, in those cities, in those regions than the I think they took it over a 5-year history, a 5-year period. So if you don't believe that COVID-19 or coronavirus is actually causing it, the thing is, how do you explain the big spike in deaths over the last 3 months? Which nobody can explain. I've actually asked that question for several people on the other side, saying that this is just normal, and they're padding the numbers. That say, well, how do you explain the spike in total deaths over the past 3 months? And nobody can give me the answer.
Well, what about the question of padding numbers? Let's deal with that. In terms of that, we talk about padding numbers. We talk about the pressure on hospitals to label all deaths COVID. Do we have an accurate sense of the deaths, or do you think they're underreported or overreported? Where do you go with that?
Let's take. Okay, number one. There was articles from USA Today, New York Times, Washington Post. I think I forget the paper in Florida. I think the Miami Gazette or something like that. That actually even the what is it, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They had like 4 papers said that the officials in the state were actually caught suppressing the numbers of deaths because they didn't want them recorded. Texas, well, it actually was Texas, Georgia, Florida, even New York. In fact, I was just reading an article just a few minutes ago where there's a New York City is listed like 13,000 confirmed COVID deaths, right? But they have like 5,000 of what they call unconfirmed.
Okay.
That are excess, that they haven't been identified haven't been identified as COVID-19. So those are unconfirmed. So if you look at the states, they always have a percentage of deaths that are unconfirmed. So those are the people that have death that may be suspected, have the symptoms of COVID-19, but they haven't been tested by a kit. Okay? And like in the early days, there wasn't enough kits because the kits it's a new virus, and a lot of the kits were inaccurate. So they were trying for like the first couple of months to actually come up with a kit that was actually more accurate. Even though they're not completely accurate, the last thing I heard is that they're like maybe 85 to 90% accurate, even though they're going to give you some false positives and some false negatives. They're actually more worried about the false negatives than the false positives because in the very beginning, there's a lot of people that went home. The anecdotal stories about people that have gone to the hospital with the symptoms. They give them the test. The test comes back negative. They sent them home, and then they're dead like 2 or 3 days later.
And we're seeing that, especially in the Black community. In terms of the question of death in regard to the virus in the Black community, what are your observations about that? What are you seeing?
There's a couple things. There's 2 things. Is that one, that the Black community, because of healthcare, they're less healthy. Okay, especially Black men, because you have more poor people, and especially you have a bigger population of the homeless are Black. And so those are the most vulnerable people. So naturally, you expect them to be the biggest percentage of people that would be succumb to something like this, especially since their immune system is probably more suppressed than probably in any other population. So that's not surprising. And the second thing is that they're not getting, when they do have symptoms, they're not getting the same health care. A lot of times, I think there was a nurse on who she was just saying that when she was actually telling Black people not even to come into the hospital if you get the symptoms, because you may not make it, because the health care that you're getting in the ICU is atrocious. They're the people that are, because there's so many people needing to be put on intubated, in other words, put on a respirator. You have a lot of people that are not trained to do it, so you get a lot of people that are intubating people wrong and killing them, or blowing up their lungs, or giving them the wrong medication, and or ignoring the symptoms. So in other words, you have a lot of people that come in that could make it, that are dying, and then you have a lot of Black people, because of whatever, getting turned away. In other words, get in checked, get symptoms, because you're Black, they don't want to care about you, they send you home, and you wind up 3 days later. In fact, I think I played there was a video going around of a lady in New York City whose husband had symptoms. They took him to the clinic, and they sent him home. They didn't check him, they told him to go home, and she said within a day he was dead. And in fact, she was saying that they called his 911 and said that he had COVID symptoms, and they reported it as a shooting. So they misreported the fact that he died of COVID. So you have a lot of people dying in their homes that are actually listed as something else, because they want to suppress the numbers. And that's common. In Florida, same thing. Basically, there was I think it was a Florida Miami Gazette. They said the number of deaths that the coroner was reporting and the number of deaths that they had on their books was like, they're off like maybe 10 or 15%. And when they called them on it, the government had to say, yes, we're holding the numbers. Same thing with Texas. So basically they are, and the USA Today said they may be undercounting COVID deaths as much as 60%, and the same thing in Europe. Said the same thing. They may be undercounting this as much as 40 to 60%. So I would say they will be undercounting rather than overcounting, even allowing for misdiagnosis.
See, my thought on the undercounting had to do with prisoners and the homeless. You talk about, and I've said this several times on this show, that you're talking about two severely surveilled, reviewed upon, underreported upon populations. And I said, so by the time, and they're also connected, right? So you have people who are arrested primarily because they're homeless, and then you have people getting out of prison who don't have anywhere to go and become homeless, which especially in Los Angeles we've seen a lot of. So those two populations are very closely connected, and neither of them are very well studied. So I said, by the time you start to see reports, especially on prisons, it's probably going to be much worse than it is. And in Ohio, we've already seen articles come out suggesting that you have 75% of the prisoners in a given prison who are infected. There's been a recent report that in federal prisons, there's an incredibly high number of the infected already, and these are people who are basically living on top of each other in close quarters and locked where they are. Any reflections on that dynamic as it pertains to the reporting of infections and deaths, as far as
it's easy to suppress numbers on the homeless, okay? And if a homeless person dies, especially a homeless person dies, they don't even give them a test, okay? They just give them a whatever death certificate and they bury them. Those are a lot of those are what they call undiagnosed. In other words, they weren't checked. They don't even test them for the kit. They just bury them. In fact, you see a lot. There's actually a picture, a video of I forget what the island is off the Bronx, right? Where Potter's Field, where they're actually digging trenches and basically digging like mass graves, like where they buried like 8,000 people that are unclaimed bodies, in the past month. Those, remember the prisoners that had digging graves in from Rikers Island? Yeah, they had those prisoners in hazmat suits burying those bodies like 3 deep into a mass grave, into a trench.
Well, and that didn't even include the trucks that we were seeing reported upon outside of funeral homes, U-Haul trucks, 18-wheeler trucks being loaded with bodies. And one of the things that I when I'm watching these debates and discussions go on, and I hear people, the question of, well, whether or not you're following corporate news as a measure of how indoctrinated you are about, whether or not this virus is real. But I'm actually interested in talking to people, especially like if we talk about New York.
Right.
I've been talking to nurses. I've been talking to people who work in the medical field in New York. I've been talking to even pastors who are in their communities, who are watching bodies being taken out of apartments. They're hearing the what do you call it, the ambulance going day and night,
and the helicopters flying overhead. Yeah.
Those are, to me, that's where I'm getting my information. When I'm talking to someone who's like, no, my neighbor, has been pulled out of her apartment. 2 other people were pulled out of their apartments last week. The funeral, the convalescent homes, where you're seeing striking numbers of the elderly passing in response to that. But then, of course, the nurses that are having breakdowns because of the load of people who are coming in and dying, and they're watching this. But then you have people that say things like, well, the hospitals are actually empty. The nurses and doctors are on TikTok performing videos and dancing because they really have nothing to do. The hospitals are actually empty. This is all, fabricated. What do you have to say about that?
Okay, it depends on, number one, where you are and what part of the hospital you work in, because the ICU is actually flooded. And the reason that other parts of the hospital aren't busy is because, one, a lot of people are afraid to come in, and number two, they're for minor symptoms that would normally have people coming in for actually emergency or urgent care. You're telling people to actually stay home. Even people with elective surgeries that actually have been postponed. So because they're afraid of spreading, having somebody come in for minor surgery coming out with infected with the virus. So they're telling people to stay home. So that would have empty hospitals. It depends on where you are in the country. If you in like Arizona or some parts of Texas, hospitals are empty because their caseloads are actually low. So it depends. If you're in the Northeast, that's probably a different story.
Okay. Well, let's stick with geography, because one of the interesting questions is how this virus is impacting different countries. Of course, there are plenty of discussions about that. I have some that are quick to point out that Sweden and Japan and South Korea and Taiwan are doing so much better, and they don't have any lockdown. And the U.S. and the EU are just fabricating this for their own purposes. What do we see happening internationally?
Okay, you got to remember, Korea locked its borders immediately as soon as the outbreak from China started. Okay. So Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, they all locked their borders. They stopped incoming traffic, international traffic immediately. Okay. Singapore did the same thing. Japan did the same thing. So the thing is, they actually locked down their borders and stopped the spread immediately. They didn't wait 2 months or 3 months like the United States did. As soon as they heard the outbreak, they started locking their borders and stopped inbound traffic from China, international travel. So they locked down their country a lot sooner than we did. If you look at Sweden, Sweden has 10 million people, but they have as many cases and more deaths than like Los Angeles County, which has the same number of people. So Sweden's spike is actually bigger than more outside than their population, because Los Angeles County has like 10, 11 million people, which is basically the size of Sweden. And they have like 1,100 deaths, and like I think it's like 2,800 cases, and Sweden has 2,500 cases, no, 25,000 cases, and like 2,400 deaths. So their deaths are actually double the amount of their population, even though they're in Europe and the European strain is a lot more virulent. But the thing is that and if you look at their neighbors like Finland and Norway, they're in lockdown, and basically Finland and Norway have a fourth of their cases and a fourth quarter of their deaths. So Sweden, Sweden could be an outlier, but the thing is that and Sweden has said they, even though it's not official social distancing and official lockdown, it's social. In other words, they encourage the old folks to stay in. They encourage the social distancing, and since unlike a liberal country like the United States, the Swedish people tend to follow orders better than we do.
Okay.
So the herd immunity, because it's the thing between herd immunity and a lockdown and social distancing. Okay, the UK originally tried, which is a bigger country, a more dense country, tried herd immunity and a non-lockdown until Boris Johnson got sick and had to go to the ICU, and then all of a sudden they locked everything down. But they're up to like 28,000 deaths. So the thing is, it just depends, because they tried herd immunity originally until the deaths and the cases started to spike.
And that's a real contradiction in and of itself, because I've had the same people who are arguing with me that the virus isn't real are talking about the value of herd immunity. And I'm saying, but in order to, first of all, herd immunity is dependent upon a vaccine. But
no, it's dependent on if enough people get it and have immunity, and that actually covers, because the virus will actually die out. Doesn't have anybody to infect anymore, so the virus will actually die out. That's where they depend on. But at the same time,
you have to first acknowledge that there's a virus. That was the second part of what I was going to say. Yeah. So you have some of the people that are arguing with me that this isn't real are also advocating for herd immunity, and I'm like, that doesn't seem to make any sense. But that was one of the things I was going to ask you to expound upon.
Yeah, that's the thing about people that say this is a hoax. They keep hopping from one theory to the next. From herd immunity to other microwaves to it's not real, it's made up, it's a scheme to do whatever, right? So they keep hopping from one theory to the next, and so I always ask them, okay, what is your theory? Since you believe it's a hoax, then what's your theory in the face of all this evidence?
Well, so you mentioned you alluded to something like a 5G when we talk about the impact of that. Now, early on, I had people that called out and said, look, this is all a hoax so that they can build 5G towers and propagate them all around where everybody's in the house.
Right.
And then I heard from there that 5G was actually causing the symptoms that were being mislabeled as COVID, and COVID was a cover for that. And then people were saying, oh, well, if 5G at least impacts immunity and diminishes its capability. What is the deal with 5G? How can we understand it in the context of this coronavirus pandemic, and what is the reality behind 5G and where it is right now in the world?
Okay, from what I've read about 5G, and this is not anything new. I mean, the studies about 5G and ill health effects, which could be real. I'm not saying that they're not, but could be real. But they've been around for like 5 years, and there's two things that jump out at you as far as 5G: the long-term effects as far as cancer causing, and the other thing is neurological. That's the biggest thing, neurological, causing neurological effects with birds, with people, and stuff like that because of the microwaves. Okay, those are the two biggest factors, and they're still debating that. Okay, but the thing is, it's not going to cause clots in your blood, clots in your lungs, heart failure, kidney failure, liver function failure, even clots in your feet. It's not going to cause that.
So none of that can result from, say, the cancers or any of that either?
No. Well, cancers is a long-term effect, causing mutations. But that's been known since 1G, since cell phones first came out. That has been a known effect for the last 35 years. They've been talking about cancer-causing effects by remember the back of the days you shouldn't hold the cell phone to your head because it caused brain cancer. Yeah, right. Remember that? And so that's been an effect for the last 35 years. And that really hasn't changed. The only new effect with 5G is the neurological effects affecting your nervous system, which affects birds and other creatures, causing them to fly different patterns or causing them to avoid the 5G towers. But that's still being studied. But those effects were known well before COVID-19.
Okay. And what is the current status of 5G use, as far as you know, around the world? Like where are we at with that?
It's basically it's really starting to be rolled out, or actually being turned on, like in Los Angeles, New York, and other places, right? But it's been in Japan and South Korea for the last 2-3 years. So they've been testing this stuff for the last 5 years. So even though it hasn't been widely rolled out, there's been towers in New York, London, LA, places that have 5G. Okay, they've turned it on to actually experiment with it. So it's not new. They've been rolling out 5G for the last 4 or 5 years.
So any connection that we can ascertain to the virus?
Only that the rollout, the biggest rollout came simultaneously with the infection.
Okay,
that's the only thing. In other words, there may be a casual effect, a casual connection, but the thing is, the things that 5G causes is not the same thing as what we're seeing with this particular virus.
Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit. We were still talking about it in a global context, and we can start there and come back to the U.S. But the economy, as it's connected to this, what are you seeing, internationally? And then, what is it we can anticipate here in the U.S.? Okay.
Like it or not, I mean, back when I think it was Thomas Friedman wrote in 2000, wrote "The World is Flat." In other words, the globally connected economy all the way around the world, and it's been more so for the last 20 years, where you've outsourced so many bits and pieces of everything to different parts of the world. So basically, the whole world is interconnected with your whole manufacturing sector, your food producing sector. Everything that you can touch, feel, taste, or even look at is mass produced all from different parts of the world. And the biggest effect we saw is when China locked down. China was the first country really locked down tight, okay, where you actually had a level 5 lockdown where armed guards were keeping people from traveling. And so they closed off their whole economy. They allowed nothing in or out for 2 months. So you saw things like the price of oil plunge, the price of products plunge. People that needed supply of parts and goods from China actually had to lay off people to go broke because they couldn't get the pieces that they wanted, the products they want from China, actually sell or be placed inside their inside what they were manufacturing. So that was the first effect of the global economy kind of taking a dip. And then, which is the second largest economy, actually affected it. And then when the United States did it, then that hit the demand side. So even though China got back up and running, started producing stuff, they had no place to sell it. And so that's what you're seeing. Something as small as meat production, okay? Farming and meat production, producing food, okay? They're still producing food, but the thing is, if there's nobody to sell it to, your warehouses, say like the meat packers, right? Okay, the warehouses and the storage facilities are all backing up because the economy is shut down. There's nobody buying it on this end. So the thing is that animals still need to be fed. There's still a cost, and farmers are going broke. So they said it's cheaper to actually kill the animals, plow under the fields, than it is actually producing. So that's what you're seeing. But the thing is, if they stop doing it, and when especially during harvest time, it's going to take 2 or 3 months for them to actually replace what they just killed off. So there's actually going to have shortages. That's why you're seeing them announce future shortages, because if the farmers are doing this, that's going to cut off the supply, and when demand comes back, it's going to cause a shortage. Which is why they gave you the stimulus in the first place, to keep the demand up, keep the economy flowing. So at least it does, the vital parts of it didn't shut down. But the thing is, it might anyway. That's what happens when the economy that's this finely tuned gets out of balance. People can't pay their rent. It affects the banks. Even something as small as 1 billion potatoes in a warehouse, I think is in Washington State. Okay, the restaurants are closed. There's no French fries being sold. Right. So now you have 1 billion potatoes with no place to go. So basically, what happens if they destroy 1 billion potatoes? Okay, how long does it take to grow a potato? A couple of months. So if they destroy all these potatoes, demand comes back, you're going to have a shortage. That's what happens when things get out of balance. With an economy this finely tuned, we're not even talking about the banks and businesses that are on a knife's edge, that need to pay rent and employees and stuff like that. They can't afford to be out too much, otherwise they're out of business. So people that need their jobs won't have them because the company's gone out of business. The business has gone out of business. How long did it take to actually for people to actually come in and fill that void? Everybody knows it's never happened before. A worldwide economy has never been shut down like this before. And this is not just here; it's global. Europe's having the same problem. Asia's having the same problem. Latin America, even Africa's having the same problem. You have a whole complete globe shut down as far as the global economy, and a global economy that was already in trouble because of the financial crises.
So the recession that was already underway,
yes,
being exacerbated by this.
Yeah, all of a sudden I see a black swan flying over and sticking a pin in a balloon that was already overinflated.
Okay, and we're seeing that definitely, even though it's on a smaller scale if we put it in a global context, but looking at African American business, it's already, difficult enough that over 90% of our businesses only have one employee. Right. When you start to factor in small businesses, black businesses really trying to sustain themselves, how long into the quarantine would you say it took before black businesses were deeply under threat?
Basically, foot traffic business for businesses that need to pay rent and pay their suppliers and whatnot, it could take a couple of weeks. Depending on the business, and especially businesses that depend on foot traffic, like restaurants and hair salons and stores and shops like that. A few weeks. You have and the people actually rent the space and the supplies and people and the companies actually send them product. It's a ripple effect.
Well, do you think it's recoupable? And I'm speaking in terms of black businesses, because often, our businesses are started with no capital as it is. But is it recoupable, or do you think it's gonna, everything is gonna have a long-term, kind of impact from this, without question. But what is the viability of black-owned businesses, after the first wave of this quarantine and whatnot?
That's a $64 question. Nobody knows, because it's never happened before. And will some businesses come back? Yeah, I do believe it. Will they come back in the same capacity? It's hard to say. What happens when people can't find jobs? Because you got like 50 million people out of work right now that had jobs like a couple of months ago. You know, that are behind on their bills, behind on their credit cards, behind on their car payments that need to be paid, and they have to catch. It's going to take them 2 months to catch up.
Well, and that's the interesting thing too, because we're not seeing, like a permanent moratorium on rents and whatnot for a certain period of time. You're seeing at best, if you don't see people being put out, which is something that, I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Long Beach, and he was commenting to me the other day the number of people who have been put out, furniture put on the front lawns or in front of apartment buildings, just out. But alongside that, for those who weren't put out, their rent is just being kind of added up, and they're going to have to pay it off. It's not being kind of frozen or forgiven for a certain period of time. So we're talking about people who are going to have to be climbing uphill if they were able to keep their jobs in the midst of all of this and paying off an accrued debt. And that's just rent. We're not even talking about other expenses. Is that something you're seeing, or am I misunderstanding that?
Oh yeah, it's something that they knew that going in. It's not something you have to see. They knew that going in. They were trying to address it, but the thing is, how can you address it amongst 300 million people? And if they do put people out, where the renters are actually going to come from? How are you going to pay your mortgage on your apartment? Or your shop, or your house, or the house, right? 30 million people, renters and people that own houses, could be out on the street. And how's that going to affect the banks that actually hold all these loans?
Wow.
You could have a financial collapse, but nobody knows because it's never happened before.
Wow.
Which is why they're bringing the economy back sooner rather than later.
Which has its obvious pluses and minuses, right? So the plus is supposedly to help people get back on their feet, because we've had, what is it? Is it over 65 or 75 million claims for unemployment? Where is it at now?
The last I saw was like 50, somewhere around 50 million claims for unemployment.
Okay, I'm going to get that other number from. Damn it.
I think there's so many people out of work, but the thing is, the claims were around, last I saw was like 35 million. But there's a lot of people that haven't claimed unemployment yet because they're furloughed, they're not laid off.
No, I'm confusing that number with something else, and I misspoke. But I do know, in terms of, like you're saying, in terms of those who are filing for unemployment, that's not necessarily a reflection of how many people aren't working. Because you have a lot of different contexts. You have companies that are refusing to necessarily fire their employees, but they're not giving them hours either. So that makes it difficult for people to file for unemployment. Depending on where you are, you might be able to file for partial, but that's usually not enough to stay afloat. And then we know the kinds of loans, the payroll loans that were extended, were nominal for a lot of people, if they ever got any of it at all. The stimulus checks, and most businesses, most small businesses, didn't get any of the payroll loans, but the stimulus checks, those were, for many people, those were gone before they got them.
In fact, I heard that in New York, the landlords actually calling to see if you got your stimulus check. And they were taking your stimulus check before you actually do anything with it.
That's kind of a toss-up, because a student of mine works at Walmart, and she said people came in and cleared out all the TVs and whatnot as soon as possible. And we're seeing lines of people in Atlanta, for the new Jordan. So it's all kinds of it's chaos right now.
Chaos right now, like the toilet paper riots.
Right. Which I'm not sure what that's supposed to be helping with, but everybody went crazy, and they still going crazy. I have not seen a roll of toilet tissue in the last 2 months in any grocery store I've been in. Matter of fact, one of my students told me in the store she works at, she said 2 women got in a fight, and one of them was elderly, and the elderly woman got punched in the face.
Wow.
Over I think it was a container of Lysol spray or something like that.
Wow, really?
Yeah, man. And that was, 2 weeks in. I think a week into the quarantine.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah,
absolutely crazy. But in terms of what everyday people are grappling with, trying to figure out when they're going to get back on their feet, trying to sustain families, because that's one of the other things we're seeing is black men in particular dying in large numbers, especially in relation to the kind of jobs that we tend to work. What is your analysis on black males' death in regard to the virus and labor, the kind of work we're doing?
Okay, number one, the X chromosome, which is responsible for mutations anyway, that's how we advance, is less stable than the I should say the Y chromosome is less stable than the X chromosome. Okay, because it's responsible for mutations. So naturally, men die earlier, die sooner. So males always die in greater numbers. Okay, so any kind of pandemic or any kind of dislocation, males will actually die more in greater numbers. Okay, as far as the black community, black men are actually more vulnerable than any other part of the population. So black men are more homeless, like you say, in jail, in prisons, more of them are homeless. So you expect to see black men die in greater numbers than any other part of the population. It just makes sense because they're more vulnerable to something like this.
And we're seeing the fallout of that, right? Especially in terms of men who are supporting families, working essential jobs.
Oh yeah.
But even though those jobs may not be high level, they're definitely out in front of the public or dealing with people, and when we're seeing the impact of that, and of course we're also seeing a kind of free for all in terms of racist violence, vigilante violence against black men. Are you seeing that as well?
And seeing that, you're seeing that's going to happen, okay? Because as law enforcement becomes less, guess what's going to happen? The law of the jungle will actually start to rule. Plus, black men actually going into hospitals are actually turned away more, okay? Not treated as well than than females or even white people. That's common. Like the nurse was saying, a lot of your people of color, which you mean black men, are actually mistreated when they go into the ICU, ignored or given somebody with less skill to actually intubate them or actually treat them. They're actually killing more of us in the hospital. So even when we make it, we're actually not treated as well. So,
and there's already been documentation that in terms of hospital treatment, medical care, black folk in general, but particularly black men, are seen as being able to take more. They're not seen as being vulnerable or in pain as much as white patients. We're already seeing that dynamic. That's been pretty much established before that. So by the time you get to something like this, we see how all of that treatment transitions into the kind of care black men get. But it looks like we have a caller. Caller, do us a favor, state your name and tell us where you're at, and then pose your question.
Peace. My name is Jamal Brown. I'm here in Southern California, and just had a question. Assuming that we do make it, we're the most resilient people on the planet. Been here since the beginning of time. So assuming, being optimistic, that we do make it out to the other side, what are some solutions that we can begin to address so that when the next wave of natural or unnatural things come our way, we can be better positioned?
The only thing that the reason that black people survive is because is our numbers, okay? Because the black woman actually produces a third more offspring than any other woman on the planet, and we produce more wombs. So we survive by sheer numbers. So as far as black people on the planet, even black people in America, we survive by fertility rates. So even though more of us may die, which in slavery more of us die, but the thing is, we produce way more people than they could actually kill. So that's why black people are actually more resilient. As far as this is concerned, because our immune system adapts faster than most other groups, which is the reason they brought us to the Americas in the first place, is because we are more resilient to disease in numbers, then that's probably the biggest reason why we'll actually make it out on the other side. which is probably why Africa is not getting as hit as hard as other places because of their immune system. They've seen just about everything, other disease that you can actually imagine. Which is, we're not going to go down that hole about why this particular virus exists. Okay, we're going to leave that one out. We leave that for another day.
There's not enough time for that one.
Oh no. That is in private and behind closed doors. Okay.
So, okay. Well, one of the things that I think is important for us to get on, while during this last few moments, is the question of viral mutation, right? I mean, one of the things we're seeing with this virus is, as you were pointing out earlier, it operates with different levels of intensity in different places. And in casual conversation, I'm hearing people attributing that to, all kinds of different things, most particularly whether or not governments have responded properly, but even down to, this just not being anything credible at all. But talk about viral mutation in regard to how this is impacting different countries, and what we're seeing.
Okay, go back to the last big pandemic we had, which is the Spanish flu in 1918, right? If you go on to YouTube and look up great courses, and look up the Spanish flu, there's a professor that actually goes through that. Okay, the Spanish flu actually started in Kansas in the United States first. And even though it was pretty bad, when the soldiers went over to Europe, it actually got worse. It actually mutated into a more lethal form. So when the soldiers came back from Europe, it actually started killing way more people, which is the second wave, way more people than it did at first. Because the way it was explained to me, it's like the law of it's like evolution. The law of the jungle, right? Basically, the most virulent, more aggressive virus actually rises to the top. Strain actually rises to the top. That's what's happening. That's like the European strain is a lot more virulent and a lot more lethal than the original one that came out of China, which is why places like New York City, Ecuador, Chile have a higher percentage of deaths in comparison to numbers than, say, like California, or Washington, or any place west of the Mississippi. Because we have two different strains. That European strain, as they call it, I think they call it COVID G, is actually a lot more lethal. Which is the 8th strain is a lot more lethal than the one we have here. So New York City is getting hit a lot harder than everybody else, or the Eastern Seaboard is getting hit a lot harder than anybody else. It's a different strain, but that's common. In fact, I saw a virologist say that COVID actually mutates slower than other viruses. A virus mutating like this is very common. So like say you take influenza A, B, there's a different strain every 6 months that comes out and affects people. That's like you have to have a different flu shot every year because you come out with a different strain every year, even though it's the same influenza A or influenza B.
Okay. That's
common.
interesting, because I'm hearing people saying everything from, this is non-existent altogether, or it's just H1N1, or it's just SARS. What makes this particular virus distinct, and how do we know it's different than what's already come? Okay,
depending on who you believe. In fact, this Chris Mortensen just actually said this in his recent Peak Prosperity video. Okay, this particular virus has a cutout that makes it more virulent. It's got a cutout to actually defeat the immune systems of normal cells. And basically, so SARS, even though it's deadly, it wasn't very virulent. It didn't spread very widely. But this one has a different cutout. I think it's like 12 genes. There's a cutout that makes it makes that spike, that little spike that you see on the outside of the coronavirus. Those little things that pop up. Okay. They have like 12 genes that actually make up those spikes. That actually cuts off actually defeats your immune defenses, or the spikes on your cells, and actually allow the virus to actually enter your body, so and enter the cell. So there's specific designs to this virus that they've never seen before. So that makes it a lot different than the SARS-1. SARS-1 was not that virulent.
Okay.
Even though it's pretty deadly, but it's not that virulent. But this one is. This one is more virulent than anything they've ever seen. It's actually twice as virulent as the common influenza, which makes it what they call it, a beast of a virus. They call this the perfect virus. They've never seen anything like it. It spreads faster. It's deadlier than anything they've ever seen.
Well, okay, so tell us, is this, in your assessment, naturally occurring, lab-based? How do you classify the origins of this kind of a virus?
All the track record, the voracious comments on it. We're talking about a state level. We're not talking about the garden variety dude that works in a lab someplace. Okay, we're talking about state level. They've all said that this is they officially they're saying this is naturally occurring, but behind the scenes they said this is nothing like they've ever seen. In other words, it couldn't have arrived naturally. It's almost impossible because it's like a billion to one shot that this thing could actually occur naturally with all the different components that it has. And basically, like Chris Morton says, he's actually showing the cutouts where genes have been replaced. From and actually exactly saying where those particular genes that actually cause it to be virulent come from. It comes from another virus that's more that can spread more easily, but the thing is, it doesn't really do anything to you. It's not deadly.
Well, one of the last things I'll ask you about is, when this started, of course, one of the things I heard a lot about was population control. Heard a lot about culling the population. Of course, we heard about Bill Gates and questions of that. As far as a virus like this is concerned, what are your thoughts about how this relates to those ideas?
Okay, number one, if most of the world is actually on a decline as far as population, it's because the birth rates are low. Okay, I would say like 70% of the world is declining as far as birth rate is concerned. Where's the only place in the world where there's an increasing birth rate? Africa. Where's Bill Gates? Africa. Put those two things together. It's going to be depopulation. Where would you depopulate? It wouldn't be in Europe or America. Where would it be? So
where the population is growing, right? Where
the population is growing. So basically, if you're importing people in the United States, why would we try to depopulate the United States? It doesn't make sense.
Okay. And the question of a vaccine, right? I think that's one of the things I've heard really the most is a fear that this is all primed to get us to accept a vaccine, and a vaccine that will likely allow us to be tracked and whatnot. And I've been hearing this for the last couple months. What are your thoughts about the virility of that idea?
From all the people that are talking about AI and tracking, basically an RFID tag has never come up. Okay, RFID trackers have been around for the last 40 years. They've recently, it's on every package that you pick up. It's easier to give everybody a free cell phone, a free smartphone, than actually go through a big hoax to actually vaccinate people. Okay, because a smartphone, which China is one of the most controlled populations. Okay, they don't track people by RFID. RFID can actually be defeated. Okay, if you say somebody did inject you with a chip, okay, you put a piece of foil over that area, it's going to defeat it. Okay, but a smartphone tracks your whereabouts. It's got a GPS. It's got a whole bunch of other things.
Okay. Man, I really want to thank you. I know your time is crazy, and I appreciate you really coming in, especially without much notice, because I thought of, let me do this a couple days ago and called you up, and you were kind enough to answer and agree to it. So thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I just want to say one thing, man. This virus has only been really out depending on who you talk to, between 5 and 7 months. Okay, it's never crossed over to the human population before. They have no clue about what it will do, how it will actually mutate, how many people it will kill. It's already killed more people than the flu already, if you believe the numbers. Like the highest number of the last 40 years for a normal flu has been like 61,000 people. There's 72,000 people within 2 months. Okay, so it's well beyond the flu. Actually, probably the death rate will probably wind up over 100,000, which has never been done. Haven't been done in the past. I would say 70 years. So this is not the flu, not even close. Not even close. It probably reached 100,000 before summer. But so then, and outside of a flu season, this is not the flu.
Well, and that's interesting you said that, because I've heard people say, well, more people have died from the flu. This is nothing. It's only a few thousand people, and I've not heard anybody really put that in context.
Yeah, I mean, I actually went back and the average amount of people that die from the flu is like 25,000 a year in the United States. Okay. It's been as low as 12. It's been as high as, like I say, 60,000, and we're at 70,000 and counting. 72,000, 73,000 today and counting.
So over 1 million infected and 73,000 killed.
Yeah. And normally the flu infects like maybe 5 million people and kills maybe, like I say, at best 25, 30,000. And basically you have 1 million infected confirmed. You have 72,000. A lot higher infection rate than the flu. A lot more deaths than the flu. So
and we really don't know the infection rates, right? That's really still a guess in and of itself.
It's to be because they don't have sufficient test kits to actually test everybody.
And what are your thoughts about whether or not the test kits are applicable to this virus? That's one of the questions I've seen raised. It's not. It's not.
And the only thing is that if you test a number of people with this kit and then see how many people actually come back with the infection. So it's basically trial and error, like anything else. All science is trial and error. Come up with a theory, you test it out, and see what comes back. And it's 2 months is not for 4 months is not enough time.
Well, look again. Thank you, brother.
All right.
As everybody here, listeners to my show know, how I like to close out. I'm letting brothers know we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM. I am here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic, selfish, and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.